All right, so welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to dive in.
Great, because today we're tackling something super interesting: emotional literacy and self-awareness.
Ooh, that sounds deep.
It is, but it's also incredibly practical, especially if you're thinking about becoming a TESOL teacher.
Right, because teaching isn't just about knowing the subject, it's about connecting with your students.
Exactly, but honestly, even if you're not on the teacher track, this stuff is gold for anyone who wants to, level up their self-understanding and handle challenges like a pro.
I like that handling challenges like a pro. That's what we all want, right?
Right. Like, ever notice how some people seem to just bounce back from setbacks while others get totally derailed?
Oh, yeah. Resilience, it's called.
Resilience. And that's one of the big things we're going to unpack today: how to build that resilience in yourself, and even more importantly, how to cultivate it in your future students.
And it all starts with self-awareness, which reminds me of that awesome Dr. Seuss quote. Today, you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you.
Haha. Love Dr. Seuss. But that's not just a cute rhyme, is it?
Nope, not at all. It's actually super profound when you think about it. It's all about self-concept.
Okay, so we're talking self-esteem, self-concept, self-efficacy. I feel like sometimes this all gets a little jumbled.
I hear you. There are a lot of self-words floating around. But think of it this way. Self-concept is the big picture, right? It's who you believe yourself to be. Self-esteem is how you feel about that picture. Do you like what you see? Or are you, not so happy with it?
Okay, I'm starting to see the distinction. So self-esteem is like the emotional side of self-concept.
Exactly. And then there's self-efficacy. That's more about your belief in your ability to actually do things, especially when it comes to learning.
So I could be a fantastic artist, super confident in my skills there, high self-efficacy, but still have low self-esteem overall.
You got it. And this is where our source material gets really interesting. It talks about this thing called the BASIS model. It stands for belonging, aspirations, safety, identity, and success.
Basis. Okay. And this model is saying,
It's basically saying these 5 elements are like the pillars of a healthy self-image.
so if I'm thinking about becoming a teacher, especially TESOL, where my students might come from all kinds of different backgrounds, this basis model is basically telling me I need to create a classroom where everyone feels like they belong,
Yes, where they can dream big, feel safe to be themselves.
where they can take risks and know they're not going to be judged or ridiculed.
Exactly. And it's not just about the students either. If you as the teacher are struggling with your own sense of belonging or doubting your ability to succeed.
Well, that's going to make it a whole lot harder to create that kind of positive, supportive environment for your students.
It's true. You can't pour from an empty cup, as they say.
So this feels like a huge argument for pre-service teachers, even those just starting out, to really prioritize their own emotional well-being. Maybe even seek out professional development that focuses on emotional intelligence and self-awareness.
100%. There's often this misconception that professional development is just about, the technical stuff, pedagogical techniques or content knowledge. But honestly, knowing how to manage your own emotions, build resilience, foster those positive relationships.
That's like Teacher 101, right?
It should be. And the best part is, these skills benefit you everywhere, not just in the classroom.
That's so true. It's an investment in yourself, not just in your career. And it's something I really wish more TESOL programs would emphasize.
Agreed. We wouldn't send a doctor into surgery without training them how to handle the pressure, right? Teaching is no different. We need to give future teachers the tools to manage stress, navigate those tough situations, and cultivate that healthy mindset.
Okay, so speaking of challenges, our source material had this story about a tutor the author initially disliked. It totally reminded me of this whole anchoring phenomenon.
Oh, anchoring. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's like our brains latch on to this one piece of information, often like the first impression we get of someone, and then it colors everything we see.
Yeah, like in the story, the author basically admitted they started disliking everything about the tutor, even though objectively there wasn't anything actually wrong.
Classic anchoring. But here's the cool part. The author recognized this was happening and actually made an effort to shift their perspective.
So what do they do?
They started writing down positive affirmations about the tutor, like every single day, and gradually their perception actually started to change.
Wow, that's wild. So you can actually rewire your brain to see the good instead of getting stuck in the negative.
You can. And that's such a powerful takeaway for future teachers, especially if you're going into a field like TESOL. You're going to encounter students who, for whatever reason, might rub you the wrong way initially.
Right. But if you can recognize that maybe those first impressions are influenced by anchoring, you can choose to see them differently.
Exactly. And it goes beyond individual students, too. Imagine you get assigned to a school that has a less than stellar reputation. If you walk in anchored to that negativity, you might miss all the good stuff.
All the potential for growth and
Yeah,
positive change.
exactly. And that's where this whole idea of reframing comes in. It's like, okay, you can acknowledge the challenges for sure, but then you got to ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I use this as an opportunity to grow?
I love that. And there was this great quote in the source material from a young girl named Kate. She said, "It is okay to fail, but it is not okay to give up." Honestly, if an 8-year-old can grasp the essence of a growth mindset, I think we can too.
Right. And that's the message we need to be carrying into our classrooms, especially with TESOL students who might already be facing those extra challenges.
Like imagine a student who's really struggling with English pronunciation. Instead of viewing that as a failure, we can reframe it as a natural part of the learning process.
We celebrate their effort, focus on the progress they're making, however small it might seem.
Because every step forward is a victory, right?
Exactly. And this whole reframing thing can also be really helpful when it comes to dealing with feedback. The source material really emphasized that.
Oh yeah, feedback, I mean, we all get it, right? As teachers, we're constantly being evaluated, observed, given feedback.
And it's easy to take that personally, especially if you're not used to it.
Totally. But the source material is saying it's important to teach students how to separate feedback from their sense of self-worth,
Right. It's not about them as a person, it's about specific areas where they can improve.
which, let's be real, that's a skill we could all benefit from, not just students.
Oh, absolutely. And again, that's where professional development comes in. Having a space to practice those reframing skills, to get feedback in a safe and supportive environment.
Yeah, it's like learning how to be a good receiver of feedback is just as important as learning how to give it well.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we've talked about challenges, about reframing setbacks, but what about motivation? That spark that gets you excited to learn something new.
Mhm.
I've always been fascinated by this thing where, like, when you really want something, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Like when you buy a new car and then suddenly that same model is like every other car on the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our source material actually uses that analogy to explain emotional engagement.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was saying that when we're emotionally invested in something, we're just more attuned to it, more motivated to pursue it.
It makes sense, right? Like, think about your favorite hobby. You probably spend hours reading about it, talking about it, maybe even dreaming about it.
Right. It consumes you. And what the source material suggests is that we can actually harness that power in the classroom. It even gives us a model for doing it, the Motivate model.
Motivate. Okay. Tell me more.
It's basically a framework for teachers to plan lessons that tap into that intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
It's not about bribing them with candy or threatening them with bad grades. It's about finding ways to make the material personally meaningful.
I like that. So how does this Motivate model work?
Well, it starts with making connections to students' lives, their interests, their prior knowledge.
Making it relevant to them.
Exactly. And then it's about observing how they're responding, adjusting if needed, and just constantly looking for ways to deepen that emotional connection.
It sounds great in theory, but how does it actually play out in a real classroom, Especially a TESOL classroom where you might have students from all these different backgrounds with varying levels of English.
That's where the teacher's creativity and adaptability come in. I mean, the source material really encourages teachers to be resourceful, to experiment with different approaches, use a variety of tools to keep those students engaged.
So it's not just about lecturing at them.
Right. It's about bringing in games, activities, discussions, visual aids, anything that can spark their curiosity and make them want to learn.
And recognizing that not every student is going to be equally engaged all the time.
Of course not. And that's okay. The Motivate model reminds us to be flexible, have those backup plans, and just accept that teaching is a dynamic process. It's always evolving.
Which kind of brings us back to the importance of ongoing professional development for teachers, doesn't it?
Totally. Having that community of practice, where you can bounce ideas off each other, try new techniques, get feedback from more experienced teachers.
That's essential for staying motivated and engaged yourself.
Because let's be real, teaching is hard. It's not all sunshine and roses.
There are definitely days when you feel like you're banging your head against a wall.
And that's when having that strong foundation in emotional literacy and a supportive network can make all the difference.
So true. You don't have to figure it all out on your own.
We're all in this together, right?
Yeah. Right. Learning from each other's experiences, supporting each other's growth. That's how we create the best possible learning experience for our students.
Couldn't agree more.
Now, before we move on, there's one more really interesting aspect of emotional literacy that I wanted to touch on. The source material delved into this whole spectrum of values, ranging from like narcissism all the way to altruism.
Oh, that's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the whole range of human behavior from it's all about me to I want to help everyone.
Exactly. And the point the source was making is that we're all wired for self-preservation, right?
Hmm.
To look out for our own needs.
Yeah, makes sense. Survival of the fittest and all that.
Right. But we're also capable of transcending that self-centeredness and developing a genuine sense of empathy and compassion for others.
It's like realizing that we're all interconnected.
Exactly.
And as teachers, we're in this unique position to cultivate those values in our students.
To help them understand the importance of collaboration, kindness, contributing to the greater good.
But how do we do that in a practical way?
Well, the source material used this really interesting example, the trolley problem. Have you heard of that one?
Vaguely.
Okay, so it's this classic thought experiment. Imagine a runaway trolley barreling down the tracks, and there are 5 people tied to the tracks ahead. You can pull a lever and divert the trolley onto a side track, but there's one person tied to that track. So, what do you do?
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
Right. Do you do nothing and let the 5 people die? Or do you intervene and sacrifice one life to save 5?
Oof. I don't know. I feel like there's no good answer there.
Exactly. And that's kind of the point. The source material doesn't give a right or wrong answer. It's more about using the trolley problem as a springboard for discussion.
So to get people thinking about their own values and how those values influence their choices.
Exactly.
And how would we use something like that with our students?
It's not about expecting them to solve complex ethical dilemmas. It's more about introducing them to the idea that there are different perspectives, different ways of approaching problems, and that our values play a huge role in our decision-making.
So maybe you present them with a simplified version of the trolley problem or some other kind of ethical dilemma, and then facilitate a discussion.
Right. Encourage them to listen to each other's viewpoints, to think about the potential consequences of different choices, and to really articulate their own beliefs.
Which, again, ties back to that whole idea of pupil voice that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's about creating that safe space where students feel comfortable sharing their opinions, even if those opinions are different from ours.
Because, let's be real, the world is full of these complex ethical dilemmas.
And our students are going to face them whether we're prepared to discuss them or not.
So we might as well give them some tools to navigate those challenges.
Tools like critical thinking, empathy, ethical decision-making.
It all comes back to emotional literacy, doesn't it?
It really does.
Which makes me wonder, should emotional literacy be like a required course in teacher training?
I think there's a strong argument for that. It's not just about teaching content. It's about equipping our students to be, thoughtful, responsible, compassionate human beings.
And to do that effectively, we need to be continuously developing those qualities in ourselves.
Couldn't agree more.
Wow, so much food for thought.
So we're back. And we've been really digging into this whole idea of a growth mindset, right? For teachers and students. But how do we actually, make that happen in the classroom?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? It's easy to talk about these concepts, but putting them into action, that's the tricky part. The source material mentioned this idea of pupil voice, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, yeah, pupil voice. It's a powerful concept.
It sounds like it's about giving students a real say in, how they learn.
Exactly. It's a shift away from that traditional model where the teachers, sage on the stage.
Right, the all-knowing expert dispensing wisdom from the front of the room.
Exactly. Pupil voice is about recognizing that students are active participants in their education.
I can see how some teachers, especially those just starting out, might be a little hesitant about that.
Oh, for sure.
Like, what if they just want to play games all day?
That's a valid concern. But pupil voice isn't about giving up control. It's about creating structured opportunities for students to share their perspectives, their feedback, their frustrations even.
Okay, so it's more about creating a dialogue than just, letting the kids run wild.
Exactly. The source material actually made this great point. It said that students are the expert witnesses to their own learning experiences.
Makes sense. They're the ones in the trenches, so to speak.
Right. They know what's working for them, what's not, and often they have brilliant ideas for how things could be improved.
Which makes me think, if we're trying to prepare pre-service teachers for the real world of teaching, this is a crucial skill to learn early on, right? Being able to actually listen to your students, take their feedback on board, and then adapt your teaching accordingly.
Absolutely. It's a core part of being a responsive and effective teacher. And it's not just about those formal feedback surveys either.
Right. It's about creating a classroom culture where students feel safe to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and share what they're thinking.
Exactly. But I know what you're thinking. How do you actually make that happen?
Yeah, especially if you're a brand new teacher and you're already feeling overwhelmed. Any practical tips from the source material?
Tons. They had all kinds of great suggestions. Things like buddying systems where students support each other, peer tutoring, circle time discussions. They even talked about involving students in, like, observing classroom dynamics and offering their
Oh,
insights.
interesting. Like student-led learning walks.
Exactly. It's about empowering them, helping them see themselves as active agents in their own learning, not just passive recipients of information.
I love that. And honestly, this whole approach to pupil voice feels very aligned with a growth mindset, doesn't it?
Totally. It's about recognizing that learning is a collaborative process, that mistakes are opportunities for growth, and that everyone has something valuable to contribute.
And those are lessons that go way beyond the classroom, right?
Absolutely. Being able to give and receive feedback constructively, to listen to different perspectives, those are essential skills for success in any field.
Okay, so we've talked about reframing setbacks, but there's a difference between understanding that intellectually and actually doing it right.
Oh, huge difference.
Especially when you're in the middle of a tough situation, it's so easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. The source material had this great analogy. It's not how far you fall, it's how high you bounce when you reach bottom. But how do we, as teachers, help our students develop that bounce?
It starts with modeling it ourselves, showing them that it's okay to make mistakes, that we're all works in progress, that challenges are opportunities to learn and grow.
So it's less about like, don't cry over spilled milk, and more about, okay, we spilled the milk, what can we learn from this? How do we clean it up and maybe prevent it from happening again?
Exactly. And I think this is especially important for TESOL teachers. Our students are already navigating all the challenges of learning a new language and adapting to a new culture. They might be more sensitive to setbacks, or feel a greater sense of pressure to succeed.
So it's even more important to create that classroom environment that embraces mistakes as part of the process. We need to celebrate effort and persistence, not just focus on the end result.
Couldn't agree more. And that can be tough because we're all conditioned to value achievement, to strive for perfection. But part of fostering a growth mindset is shifting that focus from the outcome to the process itself.
Right, so instead of just praising a student for getting a perfect score on a test, we might praise them for their effort, their problem-solving skills, their willingness to ask for help when they were struggling.
Exactly. And this applies to how we give feedback too. Instead of just pointing out what's wrong, we can focus on what the student has learned, what they did well, and how they can keep growing.
It's about reframing feedback as like a roadmap for improvement, not a judgment of their worth. And I feel like this ties back to what we were talking about earlier, the importance of professional development for teachers.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we're going to be effective at guiding our students through this process of reframing setbacks and embracing a growth mindset, we need to be actively working on those skills ourselves. Right?
100%. We need to be seeking out opportunities to learn new strategies for dealing with stress, managing our own emotions, and fostering resilience in our classrooms.
And that might look like taking courses, going to workshops, joining those professional organizations, or even just having honest conversations with colleagues about the challenges we're facing.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we don't have to figure it all out on our own. There's a whole community of educators out there who are dealing with these same things and are willing to share their experiences and insights.
And that brings us to another fascinating piece of the puzzle that the source material touched on. This whole spectrum of values, from like narcissism to altruism.
Oh, yeah. It's a reminder that we're all wired for self-preservation, right? Looking out for our own needs, but we're also capable of, moving beyond that and developing empathy and compassion for others.
It's that whole no man is an island idea. We're all interconnected.
Exactly. And as teachers, we have this incredible opportunity to nurture those values in our students, to help them understand the importance of working together, being kind, contributing to something bigger than themselves.
But how do we do that in a way that's like practical and engaging for them, the source material used this thought-provoking thing called the trolley problem.
Ah, yes, the trolley problem.
Did
Classic.
you refresh our memory on that one?
Okay, so picture this. There's a runaway trolley hurtling down the tracks, and there are 5 people tied to the tracks ahead. But you can pull a lever, right? Divert the trolley onto a side track. Problem is, there's 1 person tied to that track. So the question is, what do you do?
That's a tough one. Let 5 people die or sacrifice one to save the 5.
Right. And the source material doesn't offer a right answer. It's more about using this as a starting point for discussion.
To really examine your own values and how they shape your decisions.
Exactly.
So we're not expecting our students to come up with these profound philosophical solutions.
Not at all. It's more about introducing them to the idea that there are different ways of looking at things, that our values play a huge role in how we approach problems, and that there isn't always a clear-cut answer.
So maybe present a simplified version of the trolley problem or some other ethical dilemma and just facilitate a discussion.
Exactly. Encourage them to hear each other out, think about consequences, and really put their own beliefs into words.
Which, again, loops back to that concept of pupil voice, giving them a voice and a space to share what they're thinking.
Right, because the world is full of these complicated ethical dilemmas.
And our students are going to face them, whether we're ready to talk about them in the classroom or not.
So we might as well give them some tools to help them navigate those situations.
Tools like critical thinking, empathy, the ability to make ethical decisions.
Exactly.
Which leads me to this thought. Should emotional literacy be like a required part of teacher training?
You know, I think there's a really strong case could be made for that. It's not just about teaching subject matter. It's about helping our students develop into thoughtful, responsible, compassionate human beings.
And to do that well, we have to keep working on those qualities in ourselves.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process.
Wow. So much to think about. Welcome back, everyone. Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into emotional literacy and the growth mindset, especially for those of you out there who are getting ready to be TESOL teachers.
I know, right? It's amazing how much there is to unpack when you really start thinking about what it means to be an effective teacher. It's way more than just lesson plans and grammar rules.
So true. So for this last part, I'd love to just focus on like the key takeaways. What are those nuggets of wisdom that our listeners can walk away with and actually start applying in their lives?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me from the source material is this reminder that emotional literacy is an ongoing process. It's not like you just take a course and boom, you're suddenly enlightened.
Right. It's like learning a new language, which is kind of fitting given that we're talking about TESOL. You don't become fluent overnight. It takes practice, patience, a willingness to keep learning.
Exactly. And for teachers, this means being open to feedback, trying new things, always looking for ways to improve. Because let's be honest, teaching is a profession where you never stop learning. You're constantly adapting and refining your craft.
And that's where that growth mindset that we keep talking about is so important. Embracing those challenges, seeing those mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn, believing that you can always get better.
And it's not just for us teachers either, right? It's for our students too. The source material really emphasized how important it is to create that supportive, inclusive learning environment. A place where every student feels valued and respected.
Especially in a TESOL setting, where students might be dealing with those added layers of learning a new language, adapting to a new culture. Creating that sense of belonging is so key.
Absolutely. It's about fostering that classroom culture where students feel safe to take risks, to make mistakes, to learn from each other. And that starts with building those strong relationships with our students.
Getting to know them as individuals, understanding where they're coming from, their interests, their strengths and challenges.
Exactly. Each student brings something unique to the classroom, and it's our job to honor that.
And that makes me think about another big takeaway from the source material, this whole idea of self-awareness as a teacher, being mindful of our own emotional state and how that impacts our interactions with students.
Oh, that's huge. I mean, we've all had those days where we're feeling stressed or frustrated, and it's so easy to let that spill over into our teaching.
Right. But the source material reminds us that our students are like little sponges. They pick up on everything. They're watching us, learning from our example. So if we're modeling negativity or impatience, that's going to influence them.
So true. It's like taking care of our own emotional well-being is just as important as planning those engaging lessons or grading those papers. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Which brings us to another point that really resonated with me. The source material talked about walking the talk.
Mm.
It's not enough to just talk about emotional literacy. We have to actually embody those principles in our own lives.
We have to be the living, breathing examples of that growth mindset, of resilience, of empathy and compassion.
Because our students are going to learn more from what we do than from what we say.
100%. And that connects back to what we were talking about earlier, the importance of professional development.
Right. Like our learning doesn't stop when we graduate or get that first teaching job.
We need to keep seeking out opportunities to grow, to refine our skills, to deepen our understanding of all this stuff.
And that might look like taking courses, going to workshops, joining professional organizations, reading books, listening to podcasts like this one.
Exactly. There are so many resources out there.
And I think that's actually one of the most encouraging takeaways from this whole conversation. There's this amazing community of educators out there who are passionate about this work, who are willing to share what they've learned, and who are, constantly learning and evolving themselves.
So, to all those aspiring TESOL teachers out there, anyone starting their teaching journey, remember, you don't have to do this alone.
There's support, there's guidance, and there are tons of opportunities to learn and grow. Embrace those challenges, find those mentors, and never stop learning.
Because at the end of the day, your emotional literacy, your growth mindset, your commitment to continuous development, those are the greatest gifts you can give your students.
Beautifully said.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of emotional literacy. I hope you all found it as insightful and inspiring as I did.
Remember, everyone, learning is a lifelong journey, so keep those brains buzzing. And we'll catch you on our next deep dive.